Okay, there. I've also asked permission from Professor Daya if I could record this lecture so that I could share it with a much greater audience. All right. That being said, um, this particular lecture is a rehash of a lecture I've done for an international organization for tourism. But this one that I'm going to discuss with you is a bit tweaked towards social health. So this is qualitative research during disaster. I'm hoping to discuss this within a 30 minutes framework. Okay, so I think at this point we all know what is qualitative research already. So when you do qualitative research, it's got to be based on narratives, according to Neil. It has got to be in depth. And for you to have an in depth analysis or an in depth description of an event, it has got to use methodologies that would extract life narratives, lived experiences of people. This is essentially what is a qualitative research process is. So a qualitative research process would definitely start with a problem, a review of related literature, theoretical framework, conceptual framework, and then after which you're going to have textual data. So another point of difference between quali and quanti is that in quantitative research, numerical data will be at your hand. In qualitative research, it's going to be textual data, visual data. So those types of data would be for qualitative research. Then when you get your qualitative data, how do you analyze your data, which is the main point of this event today. I think Dr. Navidad spoke about probably SPSS or such in the morning session. For today, we're going to focus on a qualitative data analysis software known as MaxQDA. So why do we need that kind of software? Because at the core of understanding a phenomenon, a set of data based on a phenomenon, is a process called coding and thematizing. Now, when I was back in the days when we did not have qualitative data analysis software, what we usually do is that after transcription, so you interview, right? After you interview or so, what you do is that you transcribe that interview. And after that interview, what you do is that after that transcription, what you do is that you highlight, right? You're reading the text, and then you have multiple colored pens, and then you highlight the transcript with color coded explanations. And so after you do that, what is the next thing to do? You would cut those papers. At least that's what I did. I would cut the papers, color the colored parts of the papers, arrange them on my wall, because yes, it will take an entire wall for this. Arrange them on my wall, and then see from those cut out colored papers, what are the key themes that are coming in. And that is how we do analysis in qualitative research. A major flaw among qualitative researchers, at least I'm hoping this is for those who are starting qualitative research, is that they interview people, they kind of take down notes, and they say, all right, what I got from that interview is this. That is, I think, a very problematic approach to qualitative research. Why? You're prone to your own biases, because what you took note of are probably within your biases as a researcher. So it's always good to have all of your transcript read and processed in a most organized way possible. This is called the rigor of qualitative research. In some cases, I get asked like, I always hear like, oh, it's qualitative research, it's so easy to do. Contrary to that belief, qualitative research, it's quite hard to do, because you will need to read every single transcript over and over again to find out if you've missed a key point that the participant was highlighting. It doesn't only include the words that they said, it also includes their nonverbal cues. Like there are universal cues, right? And For example, if you ask somebody about their perception about, let's say, food pantries, for example, and then this person said, "Oh, the food pantries." Immediately, you see that the face opened up, and there was some semblance of excitement. But what if the person said, "Oh, food pantries"? So there's a bit of hesitation, a bit of negative response to it. So you write that down as well. Qualitative research is not just about the words that they said, it's also involving the nonverbal cues, the visual representations of the world. All right. And then from this coding and thematizing of the data, what you end up with would be an interpretation. Okay. Not a conclusion, not a summary of the world, but an interpretation of what is going on with that group of people who participated in your study. In most cases, what we do get would be a local concept of health, for example. Is, for example, in the project that Dr. Navidad and Prof. Carol and I worked on together with Prof. J, we looked into pediatric tuberculosis. What are the determining contexts why people access health support when their children catches tuberculosis? And we looked into three informal settlement societies to understand that. Why? Because our argument is that Western concept of understanding health is not necessarily always applicable to local scenarios. And developing local understanding of health is very crucial in creating a more efficient and a more equitable solution to health issues. So those are the reasons why localizing health variables or localizing health context is very important for public health professionals like you and I. Okay, next point. So just a run through about data gathering techniques. You already know this. So you have key informant interviews. Um, and these are people who are at most who had the most information and knowledge about the topic that you're studying. Notice that when you do interview, you've got to connect. So building rapport is very important during an interview. um, how many people do you have to interview? It really depends on your agenda. Some literature would say that 5 people would be enough. Some literature that I've read among anthropologists had about 250 people that they've interviewed. It literally depends on the design of your study. Now, how would you know that enough is enough? There is what you call as saturation of data. So if the people you're interviewing just keeps on mentioning the same thing over and over again, the same phenomenon, the same variables, the same context, then you know that you've hit the wall. Then maybe it's time for you to do the analysis, see the gaps, and if the gaps are very relevant, then you can go back to the field and interview some more. Otherwise, that would have been the stop to your data collection. There is also participant observation, which is kind of hard to do because of a lot of ethical consideration. Do you do overt or covert participant observation? So when you do participant observation, you live with the community members, you observe what they're doing, you participate. The key word is to participate. So if you're studying, let's say, in my case, when I did study about food insecurity among scavengers, I had to go with them and scavenge, food refuse from Jollibee. And in the evening we would collect ter or pagpag, if you know those concepts, and experience what they experience on a day-to-day basis. So participant observation would require you to stay in the field for quite a long period of time. And of course, who do you select to observe and participate with? So if you're doing like a two method system in your qualitative research, you would do interview first, and then from those people whom you interviewed, you would say, okay, these are the people whom I think I would get more if I observe them on a day-to-day basis. So that's how you select your participants for the participant observation. And so here he noticed these are my research assistants back in 2016, and we were doing karaoke with key informants. Why? Because again, in qualitative research, building rapport is the key to your success in gathering as many information as you can. And then, of course, how many people are you going to participate and observe? It depends again on your design. So here are some range of number. Field notes would be a key output of a participant observation. Why? Because in some cases, people don't want to be video recorded while you're in the field. So, what is most crucial during this period is that in every day that you go out in the field, you have your notebook with you. Sorry, you have a template which I will show in a while, and then you fill that up with information. Why? Because that field notes would serve as your primary data for the study. Okay. Now, what is the intensity or the level of bias of this kind of technique? Of course, there is a lot of bias to this because you are the observer of a particular situation. What you write down on your notes would be based on what you saw and how you are interpreting it as a person. You have to remember that qualitative research, in qualitative research, your positionality is real. Unlike in quantitative research, wherein you can somehow remove yourself from the equation, here it's quite difficult to do that. So more literature are saying that the best thing to do for a researcher is to acknowledge his or her own positionality when they do this research. So whenever I do research, one of the things that I say is that I come from a privileged status. I'm highly educated. I've not suffered from hunger my entire life, and stuff like that. I have to acknowledge those points that I'm trained in a Western context. I have to acknowledge those because that could have an impact on the things that I will see in the field. Okay. Next, focus group discussions, thing that is very much popular for a lot of qualitative researchers, and I think this is one of the hardest method to do, primarily because it's so hard to gather information from a group of people without silencing some members of the group. You see, group dynamics in a focus group discussion is very difficult to manage. Why? Because in FGDs, there is a possibility that the participant with clout, with a stronger character, with a personality that is more outgoing, will be able to dominate the discussion. So as a facilitator, it's very important for you to be able to make sure that equal representation is part of your FGD, and that when you do dialogues with them, it's very important that documentation um, is at point. For example, this is me doing an FGD with this is a very highly attended FGD. That was not the intention of this FGD, but it so happened that an entire group of lolas came. This was about older adults response to hunger in this location. So what is good here is that I have collaborators. I have my research assistants there documenting the entire thing, moving the recorder to all the people who were trying to speak. So everything that happened during that time was documented very well. But what if you're alone doing an FGD? Of course, that will be a bit of a challenge. But again, you need to do your best to make sure that every person was able to respond to the question, especially if the group has some possibility of being overtaken by one member. Make sure to have everybody speak. Make sure to acknowledge their voices. Never contradict their opinion. Don't lead them to an answer. For example, if one of the participant is saying something that you don't agree with, you don't say, "Oh, but in one study," this is not a dialogue between you and them. This is you trying to extract information from them. So whatever they say, you're good with it. You don't feed them information. You don't orient them about how to think about things. That is not the goal of a focus group discussion. You have to stop me if I'm going too fast on this. It's just that we're doing a review, right? So how many people are supposed to join an FGD? Um, Hopefully you get as small as 6 people, because the fewer the member of a focus group discussion, the better the dynamics would be, because they will be able to exchange ideas with one another. But in some cases, when you don't have the luxury of time, and that, or there is a need for you to have a more dynamic group of people, a maximum of 25 people have been documented to have been used for an FGD. But for my professional implementation, I usually just have 6 to maximum of 10 people within an FGD unit. This is an example of a field note that I usually make my students or my research assistants or my mentees complete when they're doing participant observation or FGD. Notice that the details of this, you have the date, the time, the place where it's happening, categories. These are the keywords. So before you do an observation, if you're not doing grounded theory, meaning if you're doing a regular qualitative research, I'd suggest that you already create categories. It would be very helpful for you once you start doing the codes later, because you already have those keywords that you could use as codes later on. Now, characters involved, again, very important, because you know who are the key players, key actors in your study. What are your observations? Observations, literally, what did you smell? What did you see? What did it taste like? The senses, all of it, right here at observation. And from that observation, what is your temporary, tentative analysis? You would say that, for example, when I was helping collect um, what do you call this? Helping collect pagpag. For me, so my observation was that we were collecting garbage food, and um, but I was told by my key informant that there are categories to this garbage food. Like, for me, I see a chicken that's half chewed on the garbage. I call it garbage. For him, it depended. For example, chicken with bones, some meat, and a bit of skin is called Class A. Class A would sell for about 20 pesos per kilo. So that's the highest kind of class for pagpag. Why? Because you can fry it and then you still have chicken skin. So it looks a bit complete. So what's my analysis for that observation? My analysis would be that, well, there are categories of garbage food, and these categories were made by the locals, because skin with meat and bone is like a complete package, as opposed to just bones, which are being cooked together with vegetables. So I have to make those points of analysis. Okay. Reflection is where I would say, okay, so there is a gap in my theoretical understanding of this, because I thought food security would mean that you're eating garbage food. But apparently, for this people, food insecurity means not eating actual food, but eating, let's say, chips, right? Chips and rice, or rice and toyo, or soy sauce. Then that's called food insecurity for them. So here, in just one field note, I already have a mountain of information that I can write about, that just for, let's say, a single day of observation in the field. Okay. There is also what you call as visual representation. So there are some data sets that you cannot really get through an interview and sort. So what you do is that you, for example, for children, the easiest way for you to gather information from them, because they're usually timid, they don't want to talk, is to do visual representation. You make them draw. So this is an actual data that we've collected for a project that I published in this book, Disaster Archipelago. This is about children's concept of flooding. How do children understand flooding? And look at this. This child sees flooding as not non-threatening. Look at the smile, right? Look at everyone just doing what they're supposed to do in non-flooding days, and look at her playing on the flood. So when this kid showed us that picture, I asked her, why did you draw this? And she said that she's not afraid of flooding. What she's afraid of would be mabubog, to get a puncture, to get punctured by a foreign object from the flooding. So she's more afraid of that than drowning, than leptospirosis. In fact, leptospirosis does not exist in her imagination. So it's mabubog, malunod, magalit yung magulang. Those are the three items that she is afraid of. To drown, to be physically hurt, and to be reprimanded by her parents. Those are the key fears that she had about flooding. Okay, so an ethnographic process is just a bit different, because if you notice here, there's no conceptual framework. Okay, sorry, to the organizers, can we please mute the participants? I'm hearing a feedback of sound. Thank you. So in ethnographic process, you would notice that there's no conceptual framework. Why? Because conceptual framework will come in right here on the last part, on the last stage of your research process. Remember, in qualitative research, the conceptual framework started here, right? In ethnographic process, the conceptual framework will be created right here. The theory will be created right here. I'm gonna skip that already. So can you still use these methods post-disaster? I mean, we can't go to the field anymore, right? We can't go and interview people in the field. Can we still do this? The answer is a yes. Of course, we can still do this. I've had several projects during this time that we're in lockdown scenario. And how did we do it? Now, it's very important that you have a strong community collaboration to continue on with your qualitative research. You need to have close partners with your partnership with your community members, partnership with local universities, and again, partnership with local government units. So these are things that I have ensured to have during this pandemic, because I have nationwide studies. For example, one is on mental health. I cannot go, let's say, to Albay. I cannot go to Iligan. I can't do those things. So what did I do? I made sure that I have local collaborators working there, because they will have access to the people there, and they will be able to help me gather data and information in exchange for co-authorship, provision of financial support, so those things. The other one is partnership with local universities. It's very important now. I think the pandemic has allowed us to forge intensive collaborations with other universities. So that's what I was discussing earlier. For local government units, we're talking about being able to communicate with your barangay captains, communicate with local community leaders, political leaders, because they will be the one to give more like a pass for your collaborators. The other one is that of, as I've said, community members. So right now I have several projects. One of the projects that we have is about humanitarian leaders during this pandemic. So how are we collecting data? Because my collaborators, Froilan Alipao, Philip Hernandez, and Tonette Kwan, we cannot go to the field because we're restricted, right? So what did we do? We engage our community partners from three organizations, which we will use in a while. We have Caloocan, Navotas, and Baseco. We trained our local collaborators how to do interviews, how to do visual ethnography, and they sent us the data set. We give them support, financial support. We pay them with honorarium, and at the same time, one of the best things that we're doing is that we're making them as co-authors of our papers. This is revolutionary. Why? Because this is breaking the hierarchy of knowledge production. Most of the time, only experts and scientists produce knowledge, and we just use the community partners as sources of data. In this framework, we're not doing that. We're going beyond that. We're saying enough with that hierarchy. We're going to be co-knowledge producers with our community partners. This is something that you could explore, especially if you're doing community medicine or community health. A very important um, methodology that you could explore. So other platforms, of course, there's offline technology, online technology. Um, So here are the offline data collection that I'd like to highlight. Calls. This is for community partners who have no access to Facebook or Google Forms and such. You could do interviews through phone calls. We've done this in other projects with the Department of Health. Diaries of people. You can make them do diaries and then collect the diaries. Photo documentation, and then audio video recording. One of the things I was happy about during this pandemic with data collection is that I've collaborated with my local partner, and I said, is it possible that you do like you record yourself saying something, and then they did that and then send it to me. It's revolutionary, I think, because it allows them to interview themselves. In a very comical way. It's like what we do, like we ask this person, like you look into the mirror, you tell what do you say to that person in the mirror, something to that effect. So they were able to send those data set to me, and it was used for another research project. This is an example of a diary that became so popular from the start of the pandemic. The Ugnayang Pang-Agham Tao, or UGAT, the Anthropological Association of the Philippines, created a Tala Arawan, a call for COVID-19 diaries, and they tried to make a study about this. People would log in their diaries, a sample of their diary, and then submit it to them. This is done online as well. These are examples of photos from my field site. This is my local collaborator, two of them, and they showed me how they're addressing food insecurity in their locality. Again, visual data set, right? Visual data set. Okay, online data collection, again, Google Forms, social media-based communication, social media participant observation, and data mining. I'm hoping that these are things that are familiar with you. So this is an example of a Google form research that was done by Dr. Oyeng, Florence Navidad. So this was one of their projects during this time of the pandemic, together with a good colleague of mine, Dr. Tolabing of UP Manila. So they made people answer a Google's form survey, and that worked out for them. Another one would be collaboration through social media. It's so hard for our community partners to do Zoom and such things. We have to make do of what we have. And since almost everyone has like Facebook, this is how we've collected data from community partners. We send them some questions. Interesting, right? They answered in English. I told them that they can answer in Filipino, but what they did was respond to me in English, which is okay, fine. So this is their response to me. This is from Baseco Compound, all done through a messenger, Facebook Messenger app. Now, there are also some online communities. I'm actually doing a study right now. I'm still not done with this. If you see me on Tinder, please do not judge me, because we always already have that judgment to us. Um, Tinder is a good source of a good example of doing online community ethnography. So one thing that I'm doing right now as a research project, an independent research project, is to see how people's usage of Tinder has changed. And so far, what I've found out is that Tinder used to be a hookup app, right? You use Tinder so that you can find some sexual partners, romantic partners at that. But recently, because of the quarantine, the lockdown, Tinder has not been functioning that way. In fact, Tinder has become a support group. Such a fascinating set of results. When I get the time, I'll be writing this already and publishing this. It's just that, too much going on. So what I found out is so fascinating. People are there not to find hookups. Well, some of them are still doing that and doing a lot of online-based sexual communication, but majority of them have joined Tinder just so that they can talk to somebody new, somebody outside of their Facebook group, somebody outside of their Twitter group, somebody that they could bump into, like you bump into a stranger in a restaurant or in a bar. They just miss that feeling, and so Tinder has become that for them. Nothing really on a sexual context, just to meet new people. And that is something that is very much of a interesting finding in the context of achieving well-being. This is with regard to mental health, if you think about it. Okay, a good friend of mine has been doing research on uh, Alter, the Alter community in Twitter. If some of you know that, then good for you. If not, then you'll have to do the research later on. Not right now. You have to focus on my lecture. So Mr. Fred Priscillius did a master's thesis on this and tried to understand why are people in Alter and what do they do there and what kind of community they have. Because for the most part, we have stigmatized this group that Alter is just all for people who display recorded versions of them having sex and whatnot or being sexual. In Mr. Priscillius went away from that narrative and showcased a different face of Alter, which is that these people are actually professionals, students, and they have a community support group. And even today, during the pandemic, they are alive and supporting each other. So the goal of qualitative research is to break away from um, predominant understanding of predominant, prevailing, and generalizing frameworks of society. Because the argument in qualitative research is that there are nuances to human groups, to human behavior. Okay, so on Twitter, which we'll do in a while during the Max QDA training, what is quite interesting here is that I have conducted a mini inquiry in Twitter during the start of the pandemic. There was a high xenophobic feeling going on back in March of 2020. People were starting to say a lot about the Chinese community and such, and I wondered if it is really true. Are we really getting xenophobic? Are we experiencing that? And so what I did is use Max QDA to harvest Twitter posts for several weeks and then looked into what is really the common sentiment and noticed that sometime of a Thursday of the week wherein we learned about the COVID, our first COVID case, the anti-Chinese sentiment actually grew. So look at that, a spike in mention of COVID and China. I'm sorry, I got logged off. Where was I when this got cut?
on the xenophobic.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let me. I'm almost done with this segment, and then we'll go to Max QDA. So again, this were the findings of that, and you can read about this about my findings on the editorial that I wrote on the Journal of Social Health. I have the link here. You could read it, and you see how Twitter became such a source of data for my analysis on this. Okay, now that you've gathered your data, what are you going to do? You've collected your data. What are you going to do? Look at this. This is what I was telling you of when you do manual coding. This is Froilan Alipaw, our director for Simbahayan. And these are the women of Baseco compound. We have identified key points of their discussions, and we cut them we put them in papers, we put them on a wall and try to arrange them in themes. That's the manual way of doing it. Do we still need to do it today? Well, if you don't have access to qualitative data analysis software, of course you're going to do the manual way of doing this. Plus, it's a bit fun to look a bit, a bit decorated. Your whole wall would be decorated with colorful papers. This is exactly what you do in a coding process. So you get your textual data, you can have your open codes, meaning you're reading your text, and while you're reading your text, you're pulling out the codes from those texts. That's called open coding. There is also what you call as closed coding. It happens when you already know the themes that you would like that you know will come out of the data set. So for example, you have very structured qualitative research, and you already know the variables or the context that are present in your qualitative research. What you will do is that instead of open codes, you already have your closed codes. But in this context, with the open codes, after you create them, you are going to pull them together to create what you call as actual codes, more like umbrella codes. And this umbrella codes, after you do actual coding, you're going to do selective coding. Again, text, your raw text, you read them, you see the highlighted, the key points that you would like to highlight. You can use those as codes. They are called open codes. But if you do a different way, wherein before you read the text, you already have a set of codes that you're looking for, then that's called close coding. All right, we're good. Okay, so these are just some points for future discussion with you guys if you want. So you can contact me through my email, and then my website is there, and I hope you get to access this other online context. At this point, I need you to open, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I need you to open your Max QDA. My plan is this, that after this lecture, we're going to have a session on how to use Max QDA. And then after that, we're going to do breakout rooms. I hope it's possible to our organizers. We'll have breakout rooms wherein I will be tasking you with producing, as a group, producing a sample output using Max QDA. Is that workable to everyone? Silence. It's hard to do this online.
Yep,
Um,
Dr.
okay.
Karin, pag-usapan lang po namin, para kung paano siya i-group, yung, by sections po siguro.
Okay.
Yes po.
Um, okay po. I'm no good with creating breakout rooms, but usually I just randomly put them together. But yeah, I think that's a good idea that you could put them by section so that they could collaborate well. Tama
Yes.
po?
Yes po.
Okay. All right. So let's go now to masamang tao po ba ako na hindi ako naggamit ng background natin? All right. So